The old man sat alone in the corner of the lavish ballroom, his weathered hands clutching a crystal glass of untouched whiskey. Everyone knew who Salvatore Ricci was, father of tech billionaire Marco Ricci, yet no one approached him. His reputation for coldness preceded him like a winter shadow. But when Sofia Russo walked through those doors and whispered one simple word in Italian, everything changed. What happened next would alter the course of two families forever. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more emotional tales that will touch your heart. Your support means the world to us. Sofia hadn't planned to attend the charity gala that evening. As a struggling art teacher at the local community center, she felt out of place among Manhattan's elite. But her best friend Lucia, an event coordinator, had begged her to come after a last-minute cancellation left an empty seat at a prominent table. "Just wear that blue dress I gave you for your birthday," Lucia had insisted. "No one will know you don't belong." How wrong Lucia had been. From the moment Sofia entered the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, she felt eyes following her, judging the dress that was clearly last season's design, noting her lack of expensive jewelry, questioning her presence. She clutched her small beaded purse tighter and made her way to the bar, desperately needing something to calm her nerves. That's when she saw him. An elderly man sitting alone, his silver hair neatly combed back, his tailored suit impeccable, yet something in his eyes spoke of profound loneliness. Sofia recognized him immediately from the business magazines her father used to read. Salvatore Ricci, the Italian immigrant who had built a modest construction company from nothing, only to be overshadowed by his son's tech empire worth billions. What struck Sofia wasn't his wealth or status, but the way everyone gave him a wide berth. The invisible walls surrounding him seemed impenetrable. She watched as waiters served him quickly before retreating, as guests nodded respectfully from a distance but never approached. Even his own son, Marco Ricci, whom Sofia spotted across the room surrounded by admirers, had yet to acknowledge his father's presence. Something about the old man's isolation resonated with Sofia. It reminded her of her own grandfather in his final years, brilliant and proud but increasingly forgotten. Before she could reconsider, Sofia found herself walking towards Salvatore's table. As she approached, security personnel tensed, and nearby conversations hushed. Sofia felt her courage wavering until she remembered what her nonna had taught her: when words fail, return to your roots. Standing before Salvatore Ricci, Sofia softly said one word: coraggio. Courage. The old man's head snapped up, his eyes widening with surprise. For a moment, the ballroom seemed to freeze. "Chi sei?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Who are you?" Sofia responded in broken Italian, explaining that her grandparents had come from a small village near Naples. She apologized for her poor language skills. Her grandparents had insisted on assimilation, allowing only English at home despite their heritage. To everyone's astonishment, Salvatore Ricci laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh that seemed to shed years from his face. "Your accent is terrible," he said in English, "but your heart speaks the mother tongue perfectly." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Please, sit. It's been too long since I've heard someone speak to me rather than my son's bank account." Across the room, Marco Ricci watched with undisguised shock as his father, the man who had barely spoken 10 words at public events for the past decade, engaged in animated conversation with a young woman no one recognized. The whispers spread quickly through the ballroom. Who was she? How had she breached the invisible barrier around Salvatore Ricci? Sofia and Salvatore spoke for hours. She learned that before becoming a business magnate, he had dreamed of being an artist. He showed her photos on his phone of sculptures he created in his private studio, works no one else had ever seen. In turn, Sofia told him about her struggles to keep art programs funded at her community center, about the children whose lives were transformed when given creative outlets. "These children," Salvatore said, his voice suddenly serious, "they remind me of my Marco when he was young. Always creating, building things from nothing." His eyes drifted to his son across the room. Somewhere along the way, we stopped speaking the same language. Sofia followed his gaze. Perhaps you need a translator. And you speak both languages? Art and business? Salvatore asked with a raised eyebrow. Sofia laughed. Terribly, in both cases. But sometimes it's not about perfect fluency, it's about the courage to try. There it was again. Coraggio. The word that had started it all. By evening's end, Salvatore had made Sofia an offer. He would fund her community center's art program for 5 years if she would help him reconnect with his son. Not through business or money, but through the creativity they once shared. I'm not a family therapist, Sofia protested. No, Salvatore agreed. You're something more valuable, someone who sees people, not positions. What Sofia didn't know then was that Marco Ricci had been watching their interaction with increasing curiosity. After his father left for the evening, Marco approached her directly. Whatever you're after, he said coldly, my father isn't an easy mark. He may seem sentimental tonight, but he didn't build his company by trusting strangers. Sofia felt her cheeks burn with indignation. I wasn't aware that speaking kindly to someone sitting alone required an ulterior motive, Mr. Ricci. Everyone has motives where my family is concerned, Marco replied, his expression unreadable. Then perhaps that's the problem, Sofia said, gathering her purse to leave. When you expect everyone to want something from you, eventually that's all you see, transactions instead of connections. She turned to go, but Marco caught her arm. What was it? He asked, his voice softer now. What did you say to him that made him laugh? I haven't heard him laugh like that since my mother died. The vulnerability in his question caught Sofia off guard. Coraggio, she answered honestly. I just said, courage, in Italian. It was something my grandmother used to say. Marco's expression changed, something like recognition flickering across his features. My mother used to say that too, he said quietly. Whenever I was afraid to try something new. In that moment, something shifted between them, a tiny crack in the armor of suspicion. The following week, Sofia received a surprise visit at her community center. Salvatore Ricci arrived unannounced, dressed casually in slacks and a sweater, carrying a large box of art supplies. I thought perhaps I could volunteer, he said, suddenly seeming unsure of himself. I'm not much use with the business anymore, Marco has his Harvard-educated executives for that, but I remember how to teach a child to see shapes in clay. The children were initially intimidated by the elderly man with the thick accent, but Salvatore had a gentle patience that soon won them over. He showed them how to feel the clay with their eyes closed, to understand its potential before imposing their will upon it. The secret, he told them, is to listen to what the material wants to become. Sofia watched in amazement as the formidable businessman transformed into a nurturing teacher. Week after week, he returned, becoming a fixture at the center. The children adored him, calling him Nonno Sal, and running to greet him whenever he arrived. What Sofia didn't realize was that Marco had been having his father followed, convinced that Sofia must be manipulating the old man for financial gain. When his private investigator reported that Salvatore was spending time teaching art to underprivileged children, Marco couldn't reconcile this information with his understanding of his father, the demanding perfectionist who had criticized Marco's every business decision until he had finally shut his father out of the company operations entirely. Curiosity getting the better of him, Marco decided to see for himself. One afternoon, he arrived at the community center unannounced, hanging back in the doorway of the art room where his father was helping a young boy shape a lopsided bowl. Don't worry about making it perfect, Salvatore was saying. Perfect things don't tell stories. Look at my hands, he held up his gnarled, arthritic fingers, not perfect, but they've built buildings, held my son when he was born, created art. Imperfection is where life happens. Marco felt something catch in his throat. This gentle philosopher was nothing like the harsh critic he'd grown up with. Or was it that he had never truly seen this side of his father? Sofia spotted Marco first, her eyes widening in surprise. When Salvatore followed her gaze and saw his son, he froze, uncertainty crossing his features. "Marco," he said finally. "Have you come to check on your investment?" The formal tone broke Sofia's heart. She had come to know the warm, passionate man beneath Salvatore's stern exterior, but in his son's presence, the walls immediately went up. Marco stepped into the room, uncomfortable under the curious stares of the children. "Actually, I was hoping to see what's been keeping you so busy these days." An awkward silence fell between them until a little girl named Zoe tugged on Marco's expensive suit jacket. "Are you Nano Sal's son? He says you built computers that can think almost like people. Can you make one that does art?" The innocent question broke the tension. Marco knelt down to Zoe's level. "Computers can help make art, but they can't feel what makes art special. That's something only people can do." "That's what Nano Sal says too," Zoe exclaimed. "He says art needs a heart behind the hands." Marco looked up at his father in surprise. "You always told me business was about logic, not emotion." Salvatore's expression softened. "Perhaps I was wrong about many things." That afternoon marked the beginning of a slow thaw between father and son. Marco began stopping by the community center occasionally, at first claiming he was just checking on his father's well-being, but soon becoming involved in a project to develop a technology lab alongside the art program. Sofia watched the tentative rebuilding of their relationship with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Joy because she had grown fond of both Ricci men, seeing the goodness beneath their guarded exteriors. Trepidation because she knew her role as intermediary would eventually become unnecessary. What she hadn't anticipated was how deeply entwined her life would become with theirs. Marco began seeking her perspective on his charitable foundation, valuing her insight into what communities truly needed versus what looked good in press releases. Salvatore invited her to his home studio, showing her sculptures he'd been working on in secret for decades. 6 months after the gala, Sofia found herself once again in an elegant setting, this time at the opening of a new wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, funded by the Ricci Foundation and dedicated to emerging artists from underrepresented communities. The exhibition featured works from her community center students, displayed alongside pieces by established artists. As she stood admiring the transformation, Marco appeared beside her. "None of this would have happened without you," he said quietly. Sofia shook her head. "I just said one word. Everything else was already there, waiting." "Coraggio," Marco repeated. "My mother used to tell my father that when he was nervous about expanding his business. After she died, he stopped taking risks, stopped trusting people. Including me." "And now?" Sofia asked. Marco's gaze found his father across the room, proudly showing a group of donors the children's artwork. "Now he's teaching me things I never knew he understood. About art, about connection." He turned to Sofia, his expression serious. "About seeing people for who they are, not what they can offer." Sofia felt her heart quicken at the intensity in his eyes. Over the months, their relationship had evolved from suspicion to respect to something deeper neither had acknowledged. "Sofia," Marco began, but was interrupted by the arrival of Salvatore. "There you are, both of you," the old man said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Come, the children are looking for you. They want to show you their favorite pieces." As they followed Salvatore, he leaned close to Sofia and whispered in Italian, "My son looks at you the way I once looked at his mother. Sometimes the bravest thing is to recognize love when it stands before you." Sofia blushed deeply, but before she could respond, they were surrounded by excited children eager to give their personal tours of the exhibition. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Sofia found herself alone on the museum's balcony, taking a moment of quiet reflection. The night air was cool against her skin as she considered how completely her life had changed since uttering that single Italian word to a lonely old man. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Marco approaching, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "My father says I should stop overthinking and just tell you how I feel," he said, offering her a glass. Sofia accepted it with a smile. Your father has become quite the romantic advisor. He says it's his right as an Italian patriarch to meddle in his son's love life. Marco's expression grew serious. But he's right about one thing. I've spent my life calculating risks, measuring returns on investments. And then you walked into our lives with nothing but sincerity, and suddenly all my careful equations seemed meaningless. Sofia's heart pounded as Marco set down his glass and took her free hand in his. I'm not good at this, he admitted. Vulnerability doesn't come easily to Ricci men. But if there's one thing you've taught both me and my father, it's that some risks are worth taking. He took a deep breath. I'm in love with you, Sofia. Not because you helped me reconnect with my father, though I'm eternally grateful for that. But because you see people, you saw me, beneath all the layers of wealth and reputation and history. Sofia felt tears welling in her eyes. I'm in love with you too, she whispered. Both the brilliant businessman and the man who sits on tiny chairs to help children build robots. Their first kiss was interrupted by applause. They turned to find Salvatore watching them from the doorway, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Finally, he said, throwing his hands up dramatically. I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you two in my wine cellar. 3 years later, Sofia stood in the garden of the Ricci family villa in Tuscany, watching as Salvatore taught her and Marco's 1-year-old daughter how to feel the texture of a rose petal. The community center had expanded to 3 locations, with programs that combined art and technology to create new opportunities for underserved youth. Marco had restructured his company to focus more on humanitarian innovations, working alongside his father who had discovered a renewed purpose in mentoring young entrepreneurs. And it had all begun with a single word, coraggio. Courage to speak to a stranger. Courage to bridge the gap between generations. Courage to heal old wounds. Courage to love without guarantee. As the Italian sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Sofia thought about all the invisible walls that separate people, walls of wealth, status, language, misunderstanding. Sometimes, all it takes to break through those walls is one word, spoken from the heart. In the distance, she could hear Marco on a business call, his voice drifting through the open windows of the villa. Even now, he worked too much, cared too deeply about his responsibilities. But he was learning balance, learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness but its own kind of strength. Salvatore looked up and caught Sofia's eye, giving her a wink as he placed a tiny flower in his granddaughter's curls. La famiglia, he said simply. Family. From lonely strangers at a charity gala to this moment of perfect belonging, their journey had been one of transformation. Not just for Sofia, who had gone from struggling art teacher to director of one of New York's most innovative educational foundations. Not just for Marco, who had learned that his worth extended beyond his business acumen. But especially for Salvatore, who had reclaimed parts of himself long buried beneath years of grief and isolation. As the evening light faded and Marco joined them in the garden, lifting his daughter into his arms while placing a gentle kiss on Sofia's temple, she realized that the greatest art of all was this, the creation of connection where once there was only silence. One word had changed everything. One moment of courage had created a lifetime of love. And in the end, isn't that the most powerful magic of all?